See, when I first saw the story about Dr. Anthony Fauci pleading the Fifth Amendment more than over 100 times during the questioning about the COVID, I'm going to tell you exactly what my first thought was. And yeah, he's guilty. And that was it. I didn't sit down and analyze his testimony, and I didn't listen and read every single question. It's just my brain gave me an answer almost immediately. And here's the interesting part, that a lot of people had exactly that same reaction. Majority of the population do. But instead of making another video telling you whether Fauci is guilty or not, I wanted to do something completely different. Because I caught myself doing something psychologically that I've done my entire life, a lot of times ripping apart and dissecting every ounce of me. And I'm willing to bet that you've done it too, but you've never even realized it. So I want to show you why silence can feel like evidence, even when silence itself doesn't actually tell us the entire story. So I want to take Dr. Fauci out for a second, forget him for 1 second, and let's actually talk about how our minds actually work. What I wrote here is an event. First, we have that event, and that's all this is right now. The event here was Dr. Fauci was questioned. He repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right and refused to answer more than 100 questions. That is an actual fact. So that's the fact that we're going to start with. Now here's where our minds become interesting. Because the event itself and what we think the event means are not necessarily the same exact thing. So the event happened, but that does not necessarily mean is the same exact thing. And this is where I want us to be able to slow down. Invoking the Fifth Amendment is a constitutional right, okay, and it's used for self-incrimination. It does not say by itself to prove that somebody committed the thing that we suspect them of doing. We can still personally look at Fauci and believe that he's guilty, and I'm not telling you that you're wrong. I'm saying that that is a conclusion, and that conclusions require another step. An unanswered question and psychological research on uncertainty shows that uncertainty can intensify negative emotional states. And when we're dealing with ambiguous information, our minds have to make more inferences on understanding what's happening. So, to put it in plain English, when the part of the story is missing, or somebody is not being 100% transparent, your brain wants to finish that goddamn story. And that's because having a level of uncertainty, it fucking sucks. So think about it and put this into your own life. If somebody texts you, and I know I'm guilty of this because I do this to my girlfriend a lot, and I text her and I go, we need to talk, and then I don't text her back for another hour, her mind, and it's happened to me, my mind instantly, there are 47 possible explanations. And fuck no, I need to know now. And so your brain starts basically creating a movie. And so with that, what happens is you have missing information. So with that missing information, you start to question, what happened? Why won't he answer me? What is going on? Is he hiding something? That's where the next step actually starts to happen. And this is where you start to interpret things. I'm just going to put interp to save some time. And so this right here is interpretation. And interpretation is incredibly important because we often mistake how we interpret things for facts. So the fact is he did not answer. The interpretation is he's not answering because he's absolutely guilty. Those are not the same exact things. These are separate entities. And I'm not saying that your intuition is wrong. What I'm saying is an interpretation becomes dangerous when we forget that it's an interpretation. So now, what do I know? Okay, and so what we know is he invoked the fifth. Okay, and so what I think, which we're all thinking the same thing, is he's guilty. This right here, this tiny little space that's right here, right there, that is where critical thinking lives. The problem is that when we get emotionally invested in something, that little space can disappear in seconds and it shrinks. And this isn't something that I learned because I watched Dr. Fauci, and this isn't something that I've learned because I study psychology or anything like that. It's something I have personally done in my own life. And by dissecting myself with each downfall, I've recognized this, that I have actually destroyed relationships or friendships doing some version of this. I remember getting into, heated arguments in past relationships where my nervous system was already aggravated. I was angry, I was hurt, and so that right there is where I started questioning things. And then when that person became silent, that level of silence was all my brain needed to fill in the gaps. So the event here was an argument. And so how I interpreted that, because there was missing information, maybe because they became silent or anything like that, now my interpretation is that maybe this person doesn't care at all. Like, they don't care. And so I wasn't sitting there thinking, perhaps she needs time to regulate herself. No. I still catch myself doing this a lot of the times. What I interpreted her silence through was whatever I was already feeling. Whether I was feeling hurt, mad at her, or feeling like we were going to break up. And that stems from what I think. And so when I was already hurt, that silence became that confirmation to that emotion. So my brain basically went, see, you fucking knew it. And then I would leave. And so that's where you now catch your judgment, which is exactly what we're all doing here. Because the judgment here is, see, he's guilty. We knew it. We were correct. And so a lot of people will bring these stories with them from their past, or from past fears or expectations or beliefs about relationships. All of that helped determine, what her silence meant to you. And so this right here, this is the mechanism I want you to try to remember. When something happens, we don't all have the information. Our mind is interpreting what the missing information probably means to us. That interpretation affects how we feel, and then that feeling now strengthens our judgment. Then we behave as if the judgment was already true. And that's how you can go from he didn't answer to he's guilty in seconds. Or from this person stopped talking to me to now this person doesn't love me. Or my boss has yet to answer my emails, and so I'm probably going to get fired. It's the same fucking machine. It's just different situations. So, let me write this really quick too, okay? So I can show you. So there's an emotion and there's a body response. Now this section right here, This is where I want to be careful with the phrase your nervous system. Your nervous system isn't a magical lie detector, or your body becoming activated because it does not mean that your conclusion is true. It means somewhere inside of you, your brain and your body have identified something as important, uncertain. Maybe you were frustrated, or something invoked this emotional significance. And so, just because you have these does not mean that there is proof. And that is huge, because I have made this mistake. I have felt something so strongly that I assumed the strength of feeling that feeling proved the accuracy of whatever I believed, and it doesn't. A feeling can have information to it. It can tell you that something here matters to me, but it cannot automatically tell you, therefore my explanation is correct. Now let's bring Dr. Fauci back into this. Dr. Fauci did, in fact, invoke the Fifth Amendment well over 100 times. These are facts. The missing information that we don't have is we don't have any of his answers. And so our interpretation here is, why won't he answer? Let's say, what is he hiding? What is his wrongdoing? Is he protecting himself legally? Or I just don't know yet. And now look at this. It's the same exact event. At least 3 possible interpretations. 3 to 4 that I listed. One person sees Dr. Fauci refusing to answer and says he's obviously hiding something. Again, that's my biased opinion, because I believe that I know he did something wrong. Someone else may say he's exercising a constitutional right because these politicians are threatening a prosecution against him. Someone else may say, I don't have enough information to know. The physical event did not change. The interpretation did, because of the missing information. And that's where prior beliefs become incredibly important. And I'm going to write something here right for you. So, that is your prior belief. Confirmation bias is basically our tendency to give more weight to information that supports what we already believe. If we already believe that he is guilty, which a lot of us do, that's how we are going to interpret this information. So let's be completely transparent. If I distrusted this man, then I watched him plead the Fifth repeatedly, my brain is probably going to say, see, I fucking told you. Because that's exactly what my mind did. But if I already believe Fauci had been unfairly targeted, I might watch the same hearing and my mind might say, see, he's just protecting himself from a political witch hunt. It's the same exact behavior, as just different prior beliefs. That we interpreted the information differently, and so now we have a different judgment. And that's why 2 intelligent people can watch the same exact video and walk away absolutely convinced that the other person is an idiot. And I want to make something very clear before somebody clips 15 seconds of this video. No, I will never defend Anthony Fauci. But I'm also not the one that's prosecuting him. He may have done things that do deserve this criticism. He may have his own legal explanations for refusing to answer. And both of those possibilities deserve evidence. What I'm interested in today is why you and I can feel certain things before the evidence has actually been established. Those are 2 completely different questions. And again, I will say it for the 5th time, and I'm going to include myself in this video. My initial reaction, and still my reaction to everything that's going on, is yes, he is guilty. And I'm not standing here pretending that I'm above this same shit. I'm standing here because I caught myself doing it. And so now the legal question, what evidence can we prove? And then on a psychological standpoint, What does this feel like? And these distinctions matter, especially with somebody like him. There are legal questions that what actually happened? What laws did he violate? And what evidence can be established? And yes, there have been a lot that has came out. Then there's a completely separate psychological question of where does this behavior make me feel? Those questions can influence each other, but are they identical? Feeling suspicious of somebody is not the same thing as proving that he is guilty. But at the same time, telling people they shouldn't feel suspicious doesn't magically erase their suspicion either. That's why transparency matters so much, especially when you are in a public eye. When people perceive missing information, their minds don't just stay empty. They will fill in the blanks. That's exactly what happened to myself, even in relationships. If I didn't receive an explanation, my mind supplied one. And because I had spent years struggling with that level of trust, guess what kind of explanation my brain usually supplied? And I can tell you 10 to 1, it's not the nicest one. It usually supplied the explanation that matched the world that I had already expected. That's why understanding your own history matters. Because sometimes you aren't just reacting to what's happening in front of you. You're reacting to everything this moment, this event reminds you of. So again, what do I know? That Fauci repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment during Senate questioning. What am I assuming? My assumption is he's guilty. And that is just my interpretation. What else could explain it? Maybe his attorneys believe that he could be facing potential prosecution and political targeting. And so now the next question is, what evidence would change my mind? And this is just going to be up to you. And you should have an answer. Me personally, what is going to change my mind based on this whole thing is if that gentleman would be 100% transparent. And this is where I think psychology becomes useful outside of a classroom, because you're probably never going to personally interrogate this man, but I can promise you that you're going to experience uncertainty every single fucking day. You're going to deal with it in relationships, when you raise your kids, whether you deal with work, friendships, okay, if your partner goes quiet on you, if your kids start acting differently, if your boss starts to, I don't know, maybe change their tone and you think that you're going to get fired. Maybe your friend just kind of goes ghost for a couple days and doesn't answer you. Maybe someone disappoints you. You know, somebody will say something that will remind you of someone who hurt you about 10 years ago. And within milliseconds, your mind will start writing the rest of that story. Again, I have spent years doing that without understanding what I was doing. Sometimes, yeah, I was right. And sometimes I was so fucking wrong. But the biggest change for me was learning that I didn't have to treat every single interpretation like a fact. Right here, okay? Right here, this is where you need to pause. Between the event happening and how you're about to interpret it. This is where I want everyone to live now, right here. Between what happened and what I decide it means. Because that's where you, as an individual, you get a choice. So is Anthony Fauci guilty? My biased opinion and my interpretation will say yes, but the facts will say I don't know. And that's actually the point of this entire video. My nervous system having a reaction doesn't give me evidence that I don't have. My distrust for him cannot always automatically prove that he's guilty. Someone else's trust doesn't prove his innocence. Evidence answers that question. But what I can understand is why watching somebody refuse to answer more than 100 questions makes something inside of me immediately say, yes, I fucking knew it. And maybe understanding that little mechanism gives me enough space to question myself before I judge somebody else. Whether we're talking about this gentleman, or we're talking about relationships, or our families, or our coworkers, ask yourself one question before you decide to react. Am I responding to what I know, or am I responding to the story my mind created around what I don't know? Because those two things can feel exactly the same, but they are not.